Hi, it's Olivia, and today I have several books to share with you that I think you might enjoy if you like the movie Interstellar. Interstellar is one of my favorite movies. I love thinking about it and talking about it. The books that I'm recommending, they're not exclusively science fiction. There's a number of genres, and so I'm hoping there'll be something for everyone out there. That being said, let's start with some nonfiction, and I feel like I have to start out with this first book because it's literally associated with the movie itself. So that would be The Science of Interstellar by Kip Thorne. I'm also starting out with this because this person, Kip Thorne, he's gonna keep coming up in this video. He is one of the foremost physicists out there. A few years after the movie, he won the Nobel Prize, and he was the scientific advisor for this film, and he kind of helped keep it scientifically accurate where they could. I mean, it's still science fiction, you know? It's really amazing how much work and science went into this film, especially the look of the black hole Gargantua. He goes into that in this book. He does his best to break down some really complicated stuff like black holes, wormholes, just general theoretical physics. He even talks about like the disaster on Earth. Aside from the science, I feel like this is good for the nosier ones out there, or the curious ones. At the start, he talks about how this movie came to be. He was kind of attached to this project from early on. He talks about his interactions with the creators of this film and the actors. And it's also nice that it has full, nice, big, color-filled pictures and diagrams. It's so neat that in trying to keep it as scientifically accurate, like there's literal research papers that came out of this movie. It even made me wonder, so this book came out in 2014, which is definitely before 2019, where there is this groundbreaking picture that came out. It was like the first visualization of a black hole, or the black hole's shadow, I'm forgetting, from the galaxy M87, and it was big news. And I remember, and I wished while reading this that I knew his input, like what did he think about the look of that photo. I have some good news in case you're curious. I found this lecture that he did. He gave a lecture. It's like an hour-long video, but it's really interesting if you like this stuff. And I'll link it in the description. He does talk about the look of Gargantua in the movie and comparing it to that official black hole picture. My next nonfiction book is not a science book, but a poetry collection, and that is Life on Mars by Tracy K. Smith. I believe a few years ago she was the US Poet Laureate, and this collection was the Pulitzer Prize winner. So this is broken down, I believe, into 4 sections. I'm gonna read one of the blurbs on here because I feel like they describe it much better than I do, but this blurb says, "What's most satisfying about Life on Mars is that after the grand space opera of Part 1, with its giddy name checks of 2001 and David Bowie, Miss Smith shows us that she can play the minor keys too." Yeah, I love that that blurb mentioned Part 1, because I feel like that's where a lot of the, that's where like my favorites of it were. The rest kind of definitely went into more personal territory, whereas the first had a lot of those poems that were like pondering your place in the universe. I feel like I might read one. I feel like this video is going to be filled with me reading stuff. Hi, future Olivia here. I realized there's a part I wanted to read so bad, but in the moment of filming, I just could not remember what part it was, but now I remember. It's actually from this poem titled "My God, It's Full of Stars," and this is part 3. It says, "Perhaps the great error is believing we're alone, that the others have come and gone, a momentary blip, when all along space might be chock full of traffic. Bursting at the seams with energy we neither feel nor see, flesh against us, living, dying, deciding, setting solid feet down on planets everywhere, bowing to the great stars that command, pitching stones at whatever are their moons. They live wondering if they are the only ones, knowing only the wish to know, and the great black distance we flicker in. Maybe the dead know, their eyes widening at last, seeing the high beams of a million galaxies flick on at twilight. Hearing the engines flare, the horns not letting up, the frenzy of being, I want it to be one notch below Bedlam, like a radio without a dial. Wide open, so everything floods in at once. And sealed tight, so nothing escapes, not even time, which should curl in on itself and loop around like smoke. So that I might be sitting now beside my father, as he raises a lit match to the bowl of his pipe, for the first time in the winter of 1959. And then, I want to keep reading this. Oh, but this video is already going to be so long. I'm going to keep going anyway. In those last scenes of Kubrick's 2001, when Dave is whisked into the center of space, which unfurls in an aurora of orgasmic light before opening wide like a jungle orchid, for a love-struck bee, then goes liquid, paint and water, and then gauze wafting out and off, before finally the night tide, luminescent and vague, swirls in. And on and on. In those last scenes, as he floats above Jupiter's vast canyons and seas over the lava-strewn plains and mountains packed in ice, that whole time he doesn't blink. In his little ship, blind to what he rides, whisked across the wide screen of unparceled time, who knows what blazes through his mind? Is it still his life he moves through? Or does that end at the end of what he can name? On set, it's shot after shot till Kubrick is happy, then the costumes go back on their racks, and the great gleaming set goes black. My last nonfiction recommendation is a science book again, and that is A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. I believe that this is a little dated now by a couple decades, but it does have an updated foreword. But nonetheless, it still gives like a foundation of a lot of stuff in the field. And especially he gives a look into black holes. I should say this, I think with science books like this, or even like the Science of Interstellar, I don't think it's expected that everything's gonna click immediately, you know, on the first go. You go to school to learn some of this stuff like in depth to become an expert. I don't think they're expecting people to become experts immediately after reading this. You know, give yourself some grace if the stuff doesn't click. So there's definitely parts where I had to like reread several times, and even then it was like, huh? I was going to recommend Neil deGrasse Tyson's Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, but I feel like that is really broad, really general, whereas this, I'm picking this in particular because he has a big focus on black holes. Before I start the fiction books, I wanted to quickly mention that I'm not like reviewing these books. I'm not even sure I have a review for all of them on my Goodreads. I'm just it's telling you why I'd recommend them to you if you like the movie, because I don't feel like you need to have felt that a book is 5 stars to you to be able to recommend it to somebody else. Onto the fiction. And I'm going to start out with a short story in case you do not feel like reading a full novel, and this is short. I believe it's only a couple of pages. In here, it's just a couple of pages. This is where it's, I know this is an intimidating brick of a book, but it's a giant collection of short stories. This is where I was able to read The Last Question by Isaac Asimov. This short story, the amount of time that passes in this short story is mind-blowing. Well, let me tell you what it's about real quick. There's this big, really advanced computer unit called the Multivac, and as humans continue to evolve over time with the help of it, they're able to use it for so much, but there's this one question that it can't answer of how do you reverse entropy? And really what it ends up getting at is how do we avoid heat death, or like when all of the stars in the universe wink out, you know, like the very, very last star, when its ball of energy dies out, what then? Or how do we reverse that? And over time, like this computer is never able to give them an answer to this question. So bringing it back to Interstellar, I'm going to talk about they. For a large portion of this movie, we're wondering who they is. It's some other being, some alien. And please let me know here if you interpreted things differently, because I'd love to know your perspective. But by the end, I'm pretty sure Cooper said something like, they are us. Like he realizes that they is a future highly evolved version of themselves, and that future evolved version of themselves is able to manipulate space and time. And that's how they created the Tesseract and the wormhole. Just the idea of that, of humans evolving so far to the point where we can manipulate space and time, you kind of see how that might come to be in The Last Question, because there's a lot of evolving that happens with so much time passing. And so I just think if that concept was interesting to you, you might also like The Last Question. And I thought that I thought the ending just made me sit there and like think for a minute. I was like, oh wow, that was something. And on top of that, remember I said this story features like this advanced computer. In Interstellar, we have TARS and Case. You see how they are very important to the story in Interstellar. We kind of have a similar thing with this computer's involvement in this story, and how when humans, if you're just interested about like human evolution with the help of like really advanced fancy AI, then you might like The Last Question. So next up I have Do You Dream of Terra 2 by Temi O. I'm actually going to insert the picture of its other edition just because I've always loved this cover. This story follows a group of young adults mainly. We have like a main crew of, was it 6 young adult astronauts and a couple of veteran astronauts who are embarking on this 23-year journey to another planet that's been deemed habitable, because this is actually a really necessary journey because Earth is going down the drain. It's actually, that comes up in a number of stories, like Interstellar, like in this one, where Earth is really struggling, or humanity is really struggling, and it's reached the point where like we need another home, and so cue interstellar travel. When I finished this book, my first thought was that the title completely summed up the book. It is very much about the prospect and even just like the idea of this journey. Like, don't go into this hoping for this very action-packed sci-fi opera. It's not that. Don't get me wrong, towards the end there's definitely some space action. There's a big scene from this book that really reminded me of something from Interstellar, but I'm not going to say what because I don't want to spoil. It feels quiet and contemplative. That's the word I was looking for, contemplative. There's various struggles that the characters deal with. There's drama that goes down. I mean, there's also things that I feel like are very specific to young adults that starts to happen. It's a given, kind of. But you know, like in Interstellar, the idea is to find a planet that we can live on and then habitate that planet. A lot of times the thought process just like stops there. We're kind of just like, okay, we'll just, you know, figure things out once we're there. But I feel like that question comes up a lot. Like, once we step foot on that planet, what are we going, like, what are the rules here? How exactly are we going to go about ourselves on this new space? That, because I remember there's this character, she said something that gave me pause. Like, this character, I think he had been talking about, he was like, oh, but you'll miss X, Y, and Z, and then she says, greenhouse gases, Juno said, her stomach dropping as they headed to the basement, civil war, famine. All those things might happen on Terra too, you know, Noah said. Eventually, I mean, war kind of happens everywhere. No, it won't, Juno said. We're leaving behind a world where slavery happened, 2 world wars, genocide, a world where people have used atomic bombs. Terra 2 will be different, better. We will make it better. I don't know, just something about the way that was worded. Like, I never really thought about that. Like, even if the astronauts going over, the people going over, they carry with them the history of humanity, you know? But like, literally on the new planet, on that soil, the horrible atrocities that we've experienced on planet Earth have never happened there, and it is a fresh start in that way. And even just things like who's in charge, various questions about what would happen once we found a new planet, I thought was interesting to think about. Next up, it's a big one. It's a big one, and that is 2001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke. This and the movie, I had never seen the movie until recently, and I knew that I'd want to read this, so I read this first and then I watched the movie. Looking back, I could totally see its influence on Interstellar, and it's very clear that Nolan was a big fan of 2001 because it's almost like it's paying homage to the movie. Only recently that I realized that TARS and Case in Interstellar, they literally look like little monoliths. And something I'll say real quick about the movie, I had to keep reminding myself of what year that came out because it looks so good. As someone watching it for the first time in 2022, it looks awesome. It looks great. So I'm sure when it came out, it must have just been so ahead of its time. At least in this copy, in the foreword at the beginning, it kind of explains how this book came to be in tandem with the movie and how they kind of were written along at the same time, but it still stands as its own thing. So if you don't know what this is about, we start out way back in the day. I mean, way back in the day. And there is this kind of unknown alien monolith thing that just shows up. Jump to present time, and this thing makes an appearance again, and eventually it kind of spurs this mission to Saturn. And on this mission we have a very small crew. We have some crew members who are in hibernation pods, but the only ones awake are these two main characters, and their ship is controlled by this very advanced computer called HAL. I love the writing of this. Like the movie, it was something that it didn't feel dated. Like, this came out decades ago, and it really didn't feel like too old-timey, like dense sci-fi. The way some of the stuff was described, I could see it so clearly in my head. It was kind of like, okay, in Interstellar, there's these really, really beautiful shots where they're flying by before they reach the wormhole. I mean, there's beautiful shots at the whole movie, but especially in this really quiet moment before they get into the wormhole, you could just see them floating out in space, and they look so small in comparison, especially when they pass by Saturn, and it's just beautiful. And I feel like there are parts of this that are reminiscent of that. It gives me the same kind of feeling of just, wow, look at that. They pass, there's this part where they pass by Jupiter, and just the way Jupiter was being described. Yeah, it was like the size and beauty of it. It was like, and yet the great world below was not wholly dark. It was awash with phosphorescence, which grew brighter minute by minute as their eyes grew accustomed to the scene. Dim rivers of light were flowing from horizon to horizon. There's this other line, it says, the slow minutes dragged by. Jupiter was now a vertical wall of phosphorescence stretching to infinity above them. I just pictured like all of it that is described just completely filling like their vision. There's this one chapter I have to talk about. They're such short chapters, by the way. They go very quickly, but this one is called Concerning ETs. This is how short this one is. Look, this page and this page. And that was it. This chapter was kind of looking at all the debates that were now happening about the idea of extraterrestrials. I'm just gonna read it. It's a little long, but I'm going to. The part I'm jumping in on is like they're starting about what extraterrestrials must look like. So, if there is disputation among the physicists, it was nothing compared with that among the biologists when they discussed the hoary old problem, what would intelligent extraterrestrials look like? They divided themselves into two opposing camps, one arguing that such creatures must be humanoid, the other equally convinced that they would look nothing like men. Settling for the first answer were those who believe that the design of 2 legs, 2 arms, and main sense organs at the highest point was so basic and so sensible that it was hard to think of a better one. Of course, there would be minor differences like 6 fingers instead of 5, oddly colored skin or hair, and peculiar facial arrangements, but most intelligent extraterrestrials, usually abbreviated to ETs, would be so similar to man that they might not be glanced at twice in poor lighting or from a distance. This anthropomorphic thinking was ridiculed by another group of biologists, true products of the space age who felt themselves free from the prejudices of the past. They pointed out that the human body was the result of millions of evolutionary choices made by chance over eons of time. At any one of these countless moments of decision, the genetic dice might have fallen differently, perhaps with better results. For the human body was a bizarre piece of improvisation, full of organs that had been diverted from one function to another, not always very successfully, and even containing discarded items like the appendix that were now worse than useless. There were other thinkers, Bowman also found, who held even more exotic views. They did not believe that really advanced beings would possess organic bodies at all. Sooner or later, as their scientific knowledge progressed, they would get rid of the fragile, disease and accident-prone homes that nature had given them, and which doomed them to inevitable death. They would replace their natural bodies as they wore out, or perhaps even before that, by constructions of metal and plastic, and would thus achieve immortality. The brain might linger for a little while as the last remnant of the organic body, directing its mechanical limbs and observing the universe through its electronic senses far finer and subtler than those that blind evolution could ever develop. Even on Earth, the first steps in this direction had been taken. There were millions of men doomed in earlier ages, who now lived active and happy lives thanks to artificial limbs, kidneys, lungs, and hearts. To this process, there could be only one conclusion, however far off it might be. and eventually the brain might go. As the seat of consciousness, it was not essential. The development of electronic intelligence had proved that. The conflict between mind and machine might be resolved at last in the eternal truths of complete symbiosis. But was even this the end? A few mystically inclined biologists went still further. They speculated, taking their cues from the beliefs of many religions, that mind would eventually free itself from matter. The robot body, like the flesh and blood one, would be no more than a stepping stone to something which, long ago, men had called spirit. And if there's anything beyond that, its name could only be God. When I tell you, I could have highlighted that entire chapter. I thought that was so cool. And also, everything that kind of just discussed was so reminiscent of The Last Question by Isaac Asimov. I definitely want to read more by Arthur C. Clarke. I really want to read Rendezvous with Rama. It just sounds like something right up my alley. Before I move on, I'm so excited about this recommendation. I was about to leave the bookstore. I was in the picture book section, and right before I left, I saw this orange, and I saw some numbers, and I looked closely, squint, and it said 2001. This is a picture book version of 2001: A Space Odyssey by Kinderguides. I'm assuming that there's a series of books like this because it says Early Learning Guides to Culture Classics. I was just so glad to find this because I wanted to include a picture book on this list. I wanted variety. Next, with Contact by Carl Sagan, who also was a friend of Kip Thorne. There's a plot point in this book that Kip Thorne influenced. Something interesting about its movie adaptation, it also stars Matthew McConaughey. It also had one of the same producers as Interstellar. Our main character, Ellie, who is a radio astronomer. This is, as it says, it's called Contact, but this is a first contact story with this signal that they receive from, I want to say it was Vega, the star. Is it the star or constellation? I'm blanking at the moment, but they receive their first true alien contact signal. As it says on the back, in December 1989, a multinational team journeys out to the stars to the most awesome encounter in human history. Let me set your expectations right now. That journey does not come until the very last fourth of the book. Don't go into it expecting from the start that they're about to take off. This is really about Ellie's journey too, and this story has a lot of politics, international politics, and how the world would react to something like this. And it's actually kind of nice because I feel like in this one it's kind of optimistic because humanity kind of comes together to work for this. A big difference between this book and the movie is that in the book it is a group of 5 individuals that okay, let me back up. This signal eventually evolves to where they realize that there's instructions to create a device, and this device is what will spur that journey. And in the book, it is 5 individuals that they are going to send in this device, whereas in the movie, it's just 1 person. In addition to the politics, it's there's a lot of philosophical and religious debates that come up. I'm certain that there's gonna be people who pick this up and it's gonna be this is dry. This is very dry. And so I'm just saying this so you'll have your expectations in check if you pick this up. But I still annotated this a lot. It does also have a wormhole element, if you like that from Interstellar. Also, he captures her wonder so well, her from when she's a kid and she looks up to the stars and the way she describes how she feels. I'm reading so much in this video. She said, her heart sang in anticipation. She would discover, she was sure, what else is possible, what could be accomplished by other beings, great beings, beings who had, it seemed likely, been voyaging between the stars when the ancestors of humans were still brachiating from branch to branch in the dappled sunlight of the forest canopy. Drumlin, like many others she had known over the years, had called her an incurable romantic, and she found herself wondering again why so many people thought it some embarrassing disability. Her romanticism had been a driving force in her life and a fount of delights. Advocate and practitioner of romance, she was off to see the wizard. And I love that line about thinking of romanticism as some embarrassing disability. But it feels like anything that's remotely poetic or romanticized is immediately judged or looked down upon. And it makes me think of that line that Brand had in the movie. She had there was a moment where she said that she said something like, love is the one thing that transcends space and time. And in that moment, I think she was trying to convince them too to like go to the planet with her loved one. But looking back, I felt like that, one, I think that that's a line that, you know, is immediately written off as like, oh, that's corny, doesn't fit in here. And I can understand where people are coming from, but also I just think in general, like, whenever there's something poetic or romanticized, there's this desire to immediately put it down or to immediately not like it because it's poetic and romanticized and like it has no value, or it's just like too corny, too cheesy. But I mean, there's value in the corny and the cheesy, and she's right. And if you ask me, by the way, I thought that line was what the movie was all about, because really at its heart, in my opinion, this movie is about a father's love for his kids, or in particular one child, because I think Tom really gets the short end of the stick. Oh my gosh, I really think he gets the short end of the stick in this movie. That's one of my gripes, but that's the heart of the story in a science fiction setting. When she said love is the one thing that transcends space and time, I thought she was talking about love in general. Like, didn't have to be romantic love even specifically, could be, but it could also be family love. And is that not like what the movie was about with Cooper? Literally traveling all this way, going into a black hole, manipulating gravity and something so his child could help save humanity. Like, all of this that he's doing through his love for his kids. Like, he's literally, you know, when she says love is the one thing that transcends space and time, I felt like that completely summed up like Cooper and like what he's doing. Next up, I have a collection of short stories, and that is Exhalation by Ted Chiang, or his other collection, Stories, I always forget if it's Stories of or Stories for Your Life and Others. The short story in that collection, that the whole collection is titled off of, is the basis for the movie Arrival, and I think that that is a really good recommendation. That is also one of those stories where at its heart, it is about like a parent-child love kind of element in this sci-fi world. I mean, in here, in that story, which Arrival is based off of, it's, you know, it's a story that remains on Earth, and it deals with first contact with aliens and literally communicating with them in language. But, you know, it's all this sci-fi stuff surrounding like this really beautiful relationship between a mother and her daughter. And, you know, in Interstellar, we have all of this, we have all these science fiction elements, but really, you know, we have a father's love for his kids. I picked Exhalation though. It came to mind first because while that other collection is good, I feel like I'm mainly thinking just of that one short story, whereas in here, this one has more themes that I think, like more stories that have themes that kind of you would find from Interstellar. Like the very first one has a time travel element. Oh my gosh. So the very first story that dealt with time travel, for each of his stories, he tells you his like reasoning for it, or like what inspired it. And so imagine how I felt when I went to read his inspiration for the very first story. He says, back in the mid-1990s, the physicist Kip Thorne was on a book tour, and I heard him give a talk in which he described how you could, in theory, create a time machine that obeyed Einstein's theory of relativity. And he keeps talking. Didn't I tell you that his name was going to keep coming up? Some of the stories are so thought-provoking, and so I think they're definitely up your alley if you like Interstellar, as well as if you, as a movie recommendation, Arrival. That is another movie that I really enjoy. Arrival has this music that is so beautifully sad. So like it specifically plays at this like climax scene. I thought that was another really good science fiction movie, really thought-provoking. So Exhalation, and I think I have finally made it to the final book of this video. This last book is also a very recent book. I'm pretty sure it came out just last year, and that is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. He is also the author of The Martian, and this book very much feels like The Martian plus Interstellar. In this story, we have another scenario where humanity or Earth is at serious threat of extinction, and so there's this desperate mission to save humanity, to save Earth. Our main character wakes up entirely alone, literally millions of miles away from home, and he is kind of tasked with solving this big mystery. This is this is sci-fi. Let me start out with that. You get the science in here. Our main character, was he a physicist? I can't remember. He's a teacher, but he knows his science, and as he's figuring things out, he kind of takes you with his thought process. I highly recommend you try out the audiobook for this. I thought that the reader was excellent. I started the audio like halfway through and I was like, oh my gosh, why haven't I been doing this from the beginning? Because just the way the character thinks is almost stream of consciousness. I don't know, I just felt like this really suited the audiobook format, and there is another element to the story that comes in. I'm not going to spoil that, but it is very cool how the audiobook shows this other part of the story. If you especially like the part in Interstellar where it became kind of like a survival story, not only for humanity but for the characters themselves, whether or not they'd even survive the trip. As it goes on, there's some scenes like that feel like that, like survival. And for this mission, they also have to, they have taken into consideration like time dilation. So that is all the books I have for you. I really hope one of them works out for you if you decide to check them out. I've been talking for so long, the sun has gone down, and I still feel like talking. And you know what? I think I'm gonna. So my experience watching Interstellar in the movie theater, yeah, it's in like my top favorite movie theater experiences. I saw it on the day it opened, or like the night it opened, and I just was so in awe. I watched it in IMAX, the sound, so actually, I should say, I think Christopher Nolan does this thing where sometimes the sound is like so loud that you cannot hear people talking, but it was okay in here because the music was so good. Especially with the IMAX, sometimes I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear a thing that the characters were saying because it was so loud. I saw it a second time, and both times that I saw it, I could hear sniffling in the crowd at several points in the film. It's this big, grand sci-fi film that is so emotional to so many people. And one of the first like tearjerker moments was when they get back and realize how much time they've missed, and the big scene with Cooper watching all the tape of his kids. I want to take a moment now here to talk about like the loneliness and isolation in this film. I think one of the saddest parts of the story too is thinking about like Romilly. Oh no, was it Romilly? Yeah, Romilly, the one who was on the ship waiting for them for that entire time. I mean, how horrible, and being completely alone. I mean, he did have, who was Case with him, probably, he had something, but, Dr. Mann also had a similar situation. He was stuck on his planet all by himself, and by the end of the movie, Dr. Brand is stuck on her planet all by herself. And I think that's just so scary and so sad to think about, and thinking back to Romilly, I remember earlier, he had a moment where he was talking to Cooper. He was like touching the walls. He was like, this gets to me. Being in a spaceship and how nothing separates them except for this little bit of metal and space. And then Cooper gave him like some headphones, and it was nature sounds. And it's just so sad to think that it was him who was stuck by himself for all that time, when he was probably someone who was already struggling to begin with the idea of being in there for so long, and then only to, when they come back, to realize that all of that was for nothing. That it's, oh my gosh, they are right when they say like, it is the loneliest journey in human history. That's honestly for me one of the hardest hitting parts of the whole movie. In so many of these stories too, human connection and love and empathy always becomes so critical. In these hard sci-fi stories, human connection and empathy and like just human emotion becomes essential. It's a very human thing. The moment, okay, the whole docking sequence, right? When Cooper looks like when Cooper goes to continue to try and dock, TARS says it's impossible. And then Cooper says, no, it's necessary. And to me, like, just think about it. TARS literally, as a computer, as a very intelligent computer, still would not have even attempted it. He, analyzed it and thought, this isn't gonna work. Whereas someone like Cooper, who's driven by this desire to see his loved ones again, was still like, no, it's necessary. He was pushing on where the computer would not. And I think that's a very human thing, like going where even the computers will not. That's what separates us, is our love for our loved ones, to want to see them again. Maybe it's just basic survival. Maybe he just wanted to survive that moment. I don't know, but it's what made him different than a very advanced computer like TARS. I often also wonder about the ending, like what if Cooper died. There was a distinct moment where I thought the movie was gonna end, and then he just kind of showed up awake in the station. What if they, instead of showing us like the last few minutes, that's showing us that it kind of like wrapped up nicely. We got some answers at the very end. What if we didn't get answers? What if it cut off right when the Tesseract was closing? Like, we knew maybe he helped save humanity, but, you know, maybe he died. I wonder. Sometimes I wonder if that would have been a more interesting ending. Oh, I see a little alert on my camera. I think it wants me to stop talking. There's so much more I want to talk about. I will end it here. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to share your thoughts on literally anything I've talked about, I will be thrilled to chat with you. And I will see you in another video. Bye.